In inorganic chemistry, there are 4 major types of reactions that we will be discussing in this course. And this video will talk about how you can identify the type of reaction that is present given the equation. The 4 major types of chemical reactions that we'll see in this section of inorganic chemistry are combination reactions, decomposition reactions, single replacement reactions, and double replacement reactions. Combination reactions are known to take 2 species and combine them into one, so we get one product. And that's one of the ways that we identify the combination reaction, is by the fact that we make only one product. A simplistic model of a combination reaction is to take A plus B and make a new compound, AB. Decomposition reactions are really the opposite. We start with one reactant and it breaks down into 2 products. And a model for that might be something like compound AB breaks into A and B. In a single replacement reaction, we see that one of the 2 species in a compound is replaced by an element. And so a model for this would be if I have compound AB and element C, they react and they form a new compound, which might be something like CB plus A left over. And our last one is the double replacement reaction. In a double replacement reaction, we'll see that 2 of them trade partners. I think of this kind of like square dancing, where you have a compound AB and another compound CD, and they're going to trade places. In this case, A and C will trade places so that we get CB and AD, 2 new compounds are formed. And now I'll go into a little bit more detail about each of those reactions. So let's start with the combination reaction. Again, in the combination reaction, recall that we're going to have 2 things, something with A and something with B, and they're going to come together to form a new compound, A and B. So they're going to be joined together in this new compound, AB. One of the key points to this is that we have exactly one product, and that's the way that we're going to identify a combination reaction. So combination reactions give you one product only. And so we can see there are 3 different versions or 3 different ways that we can get to A and B making AB. And the first one is to combine 2 elements. So we have 2 elements in the first one here. We have A. It has 2 magnesiums plus oxygen makes 2 magnesium oxide. The key being that it makes one product. Even though there's a number in front that's 2, they're all the same product, which is MgO, magnesium oxide. Now we see that with B, C, and D, and then I go down to number 2, and we're going to see that we have a compound and an element. In this case, we have a compound and an element. They can combine to make a single product, and that means this is a combination reaction. In number 3, we could actually have 2 compounds come together to make a single compound, and again, this is a combination reaction. How do I know? Because I made just one product. Now let's look at that opposite reaction, which is called the decomposition reaction. And it sort of sounds like what's happening is it's decomposing, it's falling apart. And so that's what we see with decomposition reactions, is they're breaking down from a single reactant, breaking into 2 other products. Those products can be elements or they can be compounds. It doesn't really matter. The key to the decomposition reaction for identification purposes is that it has one reactant. So for example, we'll look at number 1 here, 1A. We see that we have 2 water molecules, and they're going to break down with an electric current into 2 hydrogen molecules and 1 oxygen molecule. Okay? We see that for letter B, we have mercury oxide. We have 2 of those. It's going to make 2 mercuries and 1 oxygen. Notice that the O2 is as an elemental form, and it has that little 2 subscript, but that's still an element. We can have 1 compound break into 2 compounds, or a compound and an element. We can see all kinds of different things. So if we look at letter A, it's a single compound. It breaks into potassium chloride and oxygen. So we have potassium chlorate turns into potassium chloride and oxygen. If we look down below, we'll see letter D. We have barium carbonate. When it's heated up, it makes barium oxide and carbon dioxide. So it makes 2 compounds. Again, it doesn't really matter. You don't need to identify what the products are going to be, nor will you be naming those. All you need to know is that this is a decomposition reaction. The way to identify it is it starts with one compound. Notice it may have the number 2 or 3 or some number in front of it. That coefficient has no effect on how many compounds there are. There's just one compound. The next two reactions, the single replacement and the double replacement reactions, will both be asking you to both look at how to identify the type of reaction and how to predict whether the reaction occurs or does not occur. Again, that's only for the single replacement and double replacement, where you need to identify if the reaction does or does not occur. In order to do that, we will be doing a separate video about, does a single replacement reaction occur, does a double replacement reaction occur. So for now, all we need to do is identify it's a single replacement reaction or a double replacement reaction. So we know how to do combination and decomposition. We look at how many reactants and products there are. In single replacement and double replacement reactions, they both start with two reactants. They both end up with two products. What is the big difference between them? The major difference is that in a single replacement reaction, you will have one element and one compound. So for example, if we look at number 1A here, you should see iron, that's an element, and copper 2 sulfate, which is a compound. And the products will also be one element and one compound. In this case, we have iron 2 sulfate, which is a compound, and copper, which is an element. At this point, you should already know how to find the elements, the major detail being that they are single types of atoms or molecules. They're all the same atom or molecule present. So we might have something like letter C, where I have two sodiums and water. The sodium is the element, the water is the compound, and I produce something like 2 sodium hydroxides and hydrogen. And the main thing here is that the hydrogen does have a 2 subscript. It is a molecule, but it is still an element. And so you might see that. You also may see something where it's not the metal replacing the metal, but the non-metal replacing the metal. So in this case, number 2A, we see chlorine and 2 sodium bromides, and I get 2 sodium chlorides, an elemental bromine molecule. So how do I identify that single replacement reaction? I'm going to have an element and a compound. It's going to make an element and a compound. You need to have two reactants, two products. One's an element, one's a compound. Then you know you have a single replacement reaction. And finally, let's look at the double replacement reaction. So how is a double replacement reaction different from single replacement? Well, the major thing for identification purposes is to notice that I have two compounds as reactants and two compounds as products in double replacement. Recall that in the single replacement, one of them was kind of single. It was an element. It was by itself. If you have two compounds, then you're going to see it's a double replacement reaction. For example, we have here silver nitrate and potassium chloride. The potassium and the silver are going to trade places so that we end up with potassium nitrate and silver chloride. And that happens with all of these. This also happens with acids and bases. We're going to see a very specialized one called neutralization reaction. And letter C is a great example of that. Here we have H2SO4, which is a compound known as an acid, and we're going to mix that with sodium hydroxide, which is a compound known as a base. And when we're done, we're going to make a salt, in this case sodium sulfate, and we're going to make water, which is a molecular compound. So we're taking the H from one and the OH from the NaOH, we're putting that together and making water, and we're leaving behind the sodium and the sulfate. And again, the key point here is two compounds forms two new compounds. All right, so quickly reviewing. Combination reactions. They start with two reactants and they give us one product. The key being one product. That means we have a combination reaction. In a decomposition reaction, we start with one reactant. If there's only one thing, all it can do is break into something more simple. It may be an element or a compound, but it will be less complicated. And that means we have a decomposition reaction. If there's only one reactant, it's a decomposition reaction. And next we look at single replacement and double replacement. Both of these have two reactants and two products. The major difference is in a single replacement reaction, we see that there is one element and one compound. In a double replacement reaction, there are two compounds. So those are our keys. In the next video, you'll have some practice identifying each of the four types of chemical reactions.